The roar of the crowd in Las Vegas was supposed to echo like a coronation. Championship banners swayed in the rafters. The spotlight beamed on Aaliyah Wilson, freshly crowned league MVP. Photographers leaned over each other, scrambling to freeze the smiling snapshots of her holding that trophy high. On that night, the Aces weren't just expected to win, they were expected to crush, dominate, and affirm what the oddsmakers, the analysts, and even casual fans had all already decided: Indiana didn't belong here. This was supposed to be a scripted performance. Vegas, the star-studded juggernaut. Indiana, the injury-crippled supporting character. Nothing more. Nothing less. And for 2 hours, that script caught fire and burned to ash. Because from the opening tip, the Indiana Fever didn't play their role as guests. They stormed in like thieves determined to rob the MVP ceremony itself. Kelsey Mitchell, overlooked and underestimated, scorched the floor with buckets that silenced every single doubting whisper. Aaliyah Boston, carrying the weight of guarding the MVP on her own stage, met Wilson chest to chest and refused to step aside. Lexi Hull, Odyssey Sims, Natasha Howard, Brianna Turner, names the analysts brushed past as if they were afterthoughts, became brick walls, fast breaks, and relentless lungs that pushed pace until even the two-time defending champions looked rattled. When the buzzer sounded, the scoreboard told the story in its most brutal honesty: Fever 89, Aces 73. On the exact night Las Vegas had set up as a celebration, an upset detonated in front of their stunned home crowd. But what made this moment echo across the league wasn't just the score. It was the way the emotions boiled over in the aftermath. Cameras that should have been capturing smiles of routine victory started catching flashpoints instead. And right at center stage, Aaliyah Wilson, the face of dominance, the reigning symbol of consistency, the newly crowned MVP, exploded. Her words weren't whispered in the locker room. They weren't tucked inside politically careful press statements. They were fire. Raw accusations that the referees, the supposed guardians of fairness, had tilted the game. She made it clear, in her mind, Indiana didn't just fight with grit, they were handed a helping hand from the stripes. They cheated for the Fever. The sentence spread like electricity. Social media choked on it. Headlines scrambled to spin it. And fans, depending on their allegiance, either threw gasoline or water on the flames. To Fever supporters, Wilson's eruption was salt in the wound of a team that had already been insulted, ignored, and cast as undeserving. To Aces believers, it was a rallying cry, the righteous fury of a superstar refusing to bite her tongue as her team stumbled out of the gates. Either way, the clash had transcended basketball. It wasn't just about plays on the floor anymore. It had become about perception, justice, and the ever-complicated theater of sports officiating. Think about the irony here. For weeks leading into the series, Indiana had been treated like a nameless underdog, barely a footnote in analysis programs, their massive injury list used more as a punchline than a fact. And yet, the very night they shocked the reigning champs, the narrative swung so viciously that people weren't questioning whether they deserved to be here. Suddenly, they were being accused of being handed the game. That whiplash was almost dizzying. From ignored to disrespected, to allegedly unfairly favored, all in the span of one playoff night. But let's zoom in closer to what really happened on that court. Because narratives, especially heated ones, often twist the lens. Wilson had just been honored as MVP, yes. But she was guarded tighter than she'd been in weeks. Every catch turned into a battle. Her 16 points and 13 rebounds, respectable on paper, came from constant grinding through contact. Meanwhile, Indiana's guards disrupted Vegas's perimeter flow, collapsing passing lanes, turning entry passes into adventures, and forcing the Aces shooters off their favorite spots. The Fever didn't look like lucky beneficiaries, they looked like a team with a plan executed to perfection. And Kelsey Mitchell's 34-point detonation was not referees gifting whistles. It was pristine skill, balance, and the kind of shooting that etches into playoff memory. Yet, in the competitor's style of narrative spin, always framing the Fever as rewriting history, we find a new dimension here. What if Wilson's anger was the truest reflection of why this upset matters? Because when the queen of the league lashes out, When frustration boils into accusation at the officials, it means the underdog did something deeper than win the scoreboard. They cracked the superstar's aura. They made the MVP feel mortal. That explosive eruption wasn't just about whistles, it symbolized a shift in psychological terrain. Indiana hadn't just shocked Vegas on paper. They'd gotten under their skin so badly the reigning MVP couldn't hold back. Contrast that with Indiana's post-game demeanor. Stephanie White calm, level, repeating, "Keep the main thing the main thing." Kelsey Mitchell, almost understated, brushing away attention with that old-school scorer's efficiency of, "I'll let my buckets do the talking." Even Caitlin Clark, sidelined by injury, offering a supportive but nearly wordless, "Kelsey. Unreal." Their responses were grounded, cool, focused. No fireworks, no accusations, no public outbursts. Against Wilson's explosion, Indiana's side looked steady, measured, almost poetic in contrast. On one sideline, fire and fury. On the other, composure and quiet proof. This is why fans tuned in, why the clip of IAS outburst rocketed through feeds, why the debate ignited. Because sports aren't just about who scores points, they're about narratives colliding. They're about that emotional tug between reputation and revelation. And on this night, the underdog's revelation triggered a superstar's reputation to flare. The two clashed in real time, giving everyone far more to talk about than just box scores. And make no mistake, this tension is fuel. It pours gasoline on the series moving forward. Wilson's words aren't disappearing. They become bulletin board fodder for Indiana's locker room. They become the echoes running through every fever huddle where "Nobody believed in us" transforms into "Now they're saying the refs helped us." They become motivational accelerant. Conversely, they also harden Vegas into defiance, the kind born out of embarrassment and public doubt. Because teams crowned as juggernauts do not like being questioned. And once their leader has spilled her fury, there's no turning back. The battle lines are drawn not just in X's and O's, but in pride, emotion, and perception. That's why this storyline is far bigger than just one semifinal win. This is history bending in front of our eyes. In a single night, Indiana seized respect, Vegas was rattled, and Aaliyah Wilson erupted in a way that reframed the entire matchup. The champ looked vulnerable. The challenger stood taller. And the referees, those usually invisible figures blending into the background of every sporting event, suddenly found themselves as the alleged shadow characters in a drama far larger than themselves. So, when the whistle blows to start Game 2, it won't just be about basketball anymore. It will be about redemption. It will be about pride. It will be about whether Indiana can remain unshaken, proving their win wasn't officiating luck. And it will be about whether Wilson and the Aces can channel fury into focus, or if those words will hang over them like weights too heavy to carry. We've seen rivalries born from far less. Tonight might have birthed one born from flame. In playoff basketball, emotions are both weapon and liability. They can electrify a team, fueling momentum runs that feel supernatural. Or they can uncoil, spilling into frustration, misplaced focus, and crumbling execution. That's why Wilson's outburst, though dramatic, doubles as a perfect mirror, one side unbothered, grounded, anchored in belief, the other side flaring, rattled by something far deeper than a few questionable whistles. Think of how rare this is. A two-time champion who has seen just about every defensive scheme, every road crowd jeer, every headline of doubt, suddenly standing center court unleashing accusations. Wilson has faced box and one trickery, double teams sliding from every angle, entire defensive game plans written in bold to stop her, and yet, through most of her career, she's floated right above it all. Composed. Dominant. Smiling even while dropping silent double-doubles. But this was different. It wasn't just Indiana pushing her around physically, it was Indiana breaking into her rhythm psychologically. Every drive turned into a crowding swarm. Every catch ran late in the shot clock, every shot felt just 2 degrees off. It wasn't embarrassment born of a blowout, it was the deeper sting of being forced out of your element on a night built to be yours and yours alone. That's the genius behind Indiana's semifinal Game 1 masterpiece. It wasn't some mad flurry of lucky shots, it was the methodical dismantling of Vegas's balance. Look at the paint. The Aces walked in expecting domination. Brittany Griner once called Wilson a tide that never stops rising. And yet against Boston and Turner, Vegas's tidal wave repeatedly slammed into a wall. The Fever clawed the rebound toils even, then outright won points in the paint, using the one area people swore would betray them as their weapon of choice. It was a flip worthy of a scriptwriter. Indiana's weakness became its strength, while Vegas's strength wilted under pressure. Now zoom out into the atmosphere. Leading into the matchup, you saw the ESPN panels. You read the Vegas betting lines. You heard the whispers. Indiana would be lucky to survive, lucky to not embarrass themselves, lucky to simply avoid humiliation. And just as quickly as they blazed out of invisibility, they were thrust into accusations of favoritism. That swing proves something vital. Underdog narratives cut so deeply because they ignite insecurity in the dragon on the other side. Indiana flipped the table, and Vegas knew they couldn't brush it aside with casual shrugs. They felt compelled to lash out instead. But pause here. Let's not paint this as Vegas unraveling into dust. Because for all of Aaliyah Wilson's words, there's something else woven into the explosion. It's pride. It's desire. It's the same volcano that powered her to claim MVP in an era where Breanna Stewart and others stalked the crown. That fury fuels her, too. If you think her wrath aimed at officials won't translate into a thunderous performance in Game 2, you don't understand her makeup. She thrives in the crucible of defiance. And that loop, that tension, was Indiana truly helped by whistles? Or did they simply rattle the queen so thoroughly she needed a narrative refuge? Is what makes this storyline meteoric. It doesn't matter which side you chase. You're hooked. That's what the fans are responding to, beyond the stats. In barbershops, at watch parties, in Twitter mentions lit up like fireworks, the debate isn't really, did Indiana play well? Or, was Aaliyah efficient? It's, did the refs change the outcome? Because fans gravitate to controversy with the same magnetism they do to buzzer beaters. It's messy, emotional, and unresolvable. That's the currency of modern sports storytelling. Without controversy, the upset is history. With controversy layered over it, the upset becomes legend. Suddenly the Fever aren't just playing against defending champions. They're playing against accusations, against fans muttering asterisk, against the queen herself wielding fury. Few storylines are more combustible. And let's ground this back through the lens of Kelsey Mitchell. 34 points. Not just any 34, but an efficient, balanced, punishing 34. The last time a Fever player hit 30 in the postseason was over a decade ago. No one had ever done it in their first semifinal. You can't chalk that up to referees. No whistle, no foul call gives you the skill of curling off screens with a defender draped on your hip and still nailing a jumper that splashes like ice water in a desert. No officiating conspiracy places perfect arc on deep threes when momentum is begging to swing back to the champions. No stripes hand you the poise to go 6 of 6 at the line, while enemy fans scream curses about your name. Referees do not manufacture that. Players do. Mitchell did. So now imagine her perspective watching Wilson's eruption. Imagine swallowing doubt month after month, season after season, treated as surplus scoring filler compared to the league's flashier stars. Imagine being invisible on highlight packages. Now, in one night, she turns the league's spotlight around, rewrites history into her own accomplishment, and the first counterpunch she hears? The refs gave it to you. That burns. That cuts. Yet in her press demeanor, no eruption. No grandstanding defense. Just calm acknowledgement, just that classic stoic belief that her craft speaks louder than cheap words. Her silence, her restraint, became thunderous in itself. Contrasted against Wilson's explosion, it made Mitchell's masterpiece glow even brighter. Here lies the great irony. Sometimes the loudest roar doesn't come from who yells the most, it comes from who proves without reply. Indiana's play was reply enough. That's contrast framing at its most effective. Vegas stormed with accusations. Indiana countered with evidence, the only kind that matters. The scoreboard, the history books, the execution. That contrast slices deep. And yet it's not as if Indiana is out of the woods. No underdog script is ever that simple. Because the next challenge is darker. Winners of Game 1 in a best-of-5 series don't always take it all. The Aces know championship experience flows in their veins like reflex. They've flipped deficits before. They've clawed out of storms before. They will not crumble quietly. That's why Indiana's victory feels simultaneously glorious and fragile. One more Vegas win and the narrative rewinds. One more Wilson burst and echoes about helpful refereeing start carrying weight again. Everything sits on a knife's edge. Dream turned reality, now teetering into nightmare or legacy. This is what separates ordinary playoff chatter from epic epics. The very night when Indiana should have basked in celebration, controversy corrupted their triumph. That fuels them differently. They cannot let Game 1 hang as their pinnacle. They must storm forward with proof louder than words, wins louder than accusations. Otherwise, that phrase, the kind that tweets repeat and memes immortalize, sticks. They cheated for the fever. It only disappears when you bury it beneath more victories. Win again, and Wilson's eruption becomes a footnote. Lose, and Wilson's anger becomes prophecy fulfilled. Picture the Fever walking into their next warm-up, hearing those whispers from the stands, those echoes rattling from social media. Unfair advantage. Handed win. Fraud upset. Human beings absorb that, whether they admit to it or not. And that's why the composure from Game 1 is a foundation they must not abandon. They already beat the champions once on will, defense, and brilliance. They will need even more steel now, not just to face the Aces, but to face the narrative cloud that followed Wilson's storm. And for Las Vegas? Nothing fuels a champion more than public humiliation. That's the blessing and curse of dominance. Nights when you win, people yawn. Nights when you trip, the world celebrates it like a festival. Wilson herself, for all her fury at the refs, knows this reality. The next performance will be her retaliation, her rebuttal, not in sound bites but buckets, boards, and blocked shots. Her eruption may have sparked viral debates, but she will be determined the next eruption is inside the box score. And that's the tension that makes Game 2 irresistible. The refs didn't score 34 for Mitchell. But if Wilson scores 34 tomorrow, the Fever will feel the full weight of poking the dragon. So here stands our collision stage. A rookie to the semifinals versus a dynasty decorated by back-to-back championships. Unshakable underdogs against a rattled queen. Allegations, pride, fury, history. All carried by the ball's bounce into the next 40 minutes of gameplay. And the truth is, what happens next is bigger than one scoreboard. It will either validate or eradicate Wilson's words. It will either prove Indiana's defiance or deflate it back into a one-night memory. And every dribble will matter as proof or defense in this trial of perception playing out before the eyes of the league. That is playoff basketball. That is why one eruption can turn into a storyline heavy enough to shift the ground. And sports history doesn't remember every scoreboard. It remembers moments. And sometimes, those moments aren't dazzling dunks or buzzer beaters, they're bursts of emotion so raw they ripple beyond the hardwood. That's why Wilson's explosion won't vanish quietly. It's already etched into this series, already painting invisible lines across the court. The Fever didn't just score buckets, they scored belief. And Wilson didn't just vent frustration, she handed Indiana an identity to push against. You could almost feel it in the Fever's locker room afterward. A group that had clawed its way into the semifinals despite missing nearly half its roster suddenly found itself staring at a gift it didn't ask for. Vindication, but framed inside disrespect. Everyone said they couldn't win. They won. And now people say, they didn't win fairly. Can you imagine how galvanizing that becomes to a team already drip-fed on doubt? Their underdog heartbeat just got louder. Coaches preach, us against the world. Wilson practically gave them the slogan on a silver platter. That's the contrast that makes this a psychological masterpiece. Think of the body language. Indiana walking off court steady, businesslike, repeating lines about focus, no victory laps. Vegas leaving the floor tight-faced, their leader venting fury at the refs. Who looks like the veteran? Who looks like the dynasty? On a night that should have underlined the Aces' dominance, it was Indiana who looked seasoned, Indiana who looked impervious to the circus of narrative. That's how underdogs solidify. That's how teams transform identity from fluke upset into dangerous resilience. It's also why preparation for Game 2 isn't just tape study, it's narrative study. The Fever know every whistle will be scrutinized. They know every call will be replayed 1,000 times online like FBI surveillance footage. They know fans whisper that referees are gifts in red and black. That awareness can twist into hesitation, or it can become a forge that hardens. The great underdog runs thrive when teams lean into the noise, use it, laugh at it. When your opponent believes the refs are your sixth woman, your only job is to play so well that no whistle could possibly cover it up. That's Indiana's mission now. Meanwhile, Las Vegas prepares differently. Anger fuels, but anger blinds too. When stars fume at referees, sometimes teammates absorb that energy in ways that scatter concentration. Loose arms reach in too much. Frustrated fouls rack up. Offensive rhythm skids. Already in Game 1, out of rhythm Wilson meant an out of rhythm Aces. No superstars in island their orbits that set the pace for everyone around them. Which means Indiana's greatest victory in Game 1 wasn't just Kelsey Mitchell's 34. It was making Wilson's rhythm collapse so the entire Aces offense staggered like dominoes. That's the blueprint at the heart of all upsets. Knock the leader off balance. Watch the empire stumble. And yet the empire doesn't fade under one stumble. Look back through championship lore. Dynasty teams don't crack, they retool. They come back in games 2, 3, 4 with schemes sharpened and stakes magnified. That's why Wilson's outburst might be a blessing in disguise for Vegas too. A locker room won't let those words hang without reply. Coaches will remind them every day perception says your win-loss record is tarnished, that the refs robbed you. Pressure like that often forges rebounds where players sharpen with fury. The Aces' pride might feel dented, but wounded pride often fights harder than confident pride. And fans? They're split straight down invisible lines. Online, Fever Nation rallies with laughs and fury of their own. Cheated? Mitchell's buckets don't need refs. Fire emojis flood timelines, fans turning Wilson's explosion into memes, remixing highlights with captions mocking the refs helped theory. On the other side, Aces faithful amplify every clip of questionable calls, freeze-framing possessions like JFK footage, swearing the officiating stole momentum. The debate swirls, feeding both sides oxygen. That's the new arena games played on social media turf as much as hardwood floors. And both teams know those voices seep into the locker rooms. Look even closer at the layers. While Indiana wears underdog status like armor, Vegas wears expectation like chains. Every player suits up against decades of narrative. Champs bounce back. Champs do not falter. That pressure is its own opponent. When Wilson erupted, she gave a glimpse of what happens when those chains tug hard. And Indiana, calm and low-key, stood freer because no one expects them here. That freedom is intoxicating. Teams without fear play looser, faster, and fearless basketball wins playoff games when pressure mounts. Narratively, this duel is poetry, the most respected team in the league against the least respected. One defined by stability, the other defined by roster shuffling and injuries. One crowned before tip-off, the other dismissed as lucky to be present. And yet, in the clash, they don't look like their reputations. That's why fans love underdog arcs. They give you the mirror flip, giants trembling, underdogs striding. The world feels upside down, and we can't look away. But the fireworks aren't finished. Because Game 2 isn't just another basketball game, it's a test of truth. Did refs really bend the scales? Or did Indiana bend Vegas into discomfort with pure execution? Only repetition can answer that. If Indiana does it again, the narrative is dead, cooked, buried. Accusations evaporate. If Vegas steamrolls, the suspicions spread like wildfire. See? It was the refs. Either outcome escalates the storyline. That's why this series already hums with viral energy. Its fate carved into entertainment. And for Wilson, the road forks here. Explosions define leaders one of two ways, either as weakness exposed, or as catalysts for ferocity to follow. The greats have all had these nights entrances into the crucible where emotion spills, then shifts into engine fuel. For every accusation of refereeing favoritism, Wilson has a chance to inject silence by dominating the next contest. It wouldn't be the first time she's pivoted fury into masterpieces. The narrative begs for that response, begs for her to reclaim her microphone not through post-game quotes, but signature stomp stats that no official could bend. The longer she waits, the more oxygen Indiana breathes into their fire. And then you pan back to Kelsey Mitchell. Think about how delicious the irony is. For years overshadowed by flashier names, overlooked in highlight reels, rarely mentioned among faces of the league. And yet the superstar with the biggest spotlight aimed straight at her, Aaliyah Wilson herself, just wrote the memo that ensures everyone's eyes now trace back to Indiana, to Mitchell. She lit their stage. Not intentionally, of course. But Wilson's loud rejection of the outcome only amplified what happened. That's storytelling at work. The villain's protest creates the hero's halo. Even if it wasn't meant to. The great underdog runs always have that one spark that turns belief into wildfire. The Knicks had John Starks. The Pistons had grit against shrugs of Celtics dynasties. The miracle on ice. Hockey magic came not from goals but disbelief toppled. For Indiana? It may just be Kelsey Mitchell dropping 34 while the MVP accused the refs. That's the exact script fans replay forever. Because it feels human, overlooked soldier finally crowns herself when no one believes she belongs and absorbs her rival's fury as fuel. History will write one of two stories. Either shock gave way to collapse, Indiana drowned in the storm that comes when giants wake angry, Wilson buried accusations beneath domination. Or shock carved momentum into a legend that only amplified when their rival cracked under narrative pressure, with Wilson's words remembered as the moment pride transformed into fragility. Either way, we'll remember it. Because playoff sports don't fade too gentle, they cement. And this cement is already being poured. So when Wilson erupted, she wasn't just voicing anger at three officials. She was unintentionally chiseling context for an entire playoff run. Indiana now walks holding that narrative like a flag. They said it was the refs. Vegas walks with a shadow chasing them. We cannot trip again. And fans, pulling rank from couches, TikToks, and Twitter stages, sharpen the debate into an edge both teams must now play upon. It may shake Indiana. It may sharpen Vegas. Either way, it ensures this series transcends basketball into cultural echo. That's the real beauty of this story. You don't need to know pick-and-roll strategies or pace and space analytics to feel the rawness. Everyone understands doubt. Everyone understands pride. Everyone understands what it means to have your glory dismissed, or to feel cheated when your expected crown is tipped. That's why this series sings, that's why every feed lights up. The emotions are bigger than the arena. And that clashing storm sets the stage for the defining act, Game 2, where emotion meets action, where words meet will, and where both sides underdog. Game 2 is no longer just a game. It's a referendum. A clash not only of two basketball teams but of narratives, pride, and psychological warfare. What began as a contest of execution has spiraled into something layered with grievance, tension, and symbolism. For the Fever, it's their chance to prove they are real contenders and not shadows propped by circumstance. For the Aces, it's about pride, about reclaiming the balance of power, and above all about refusing to let their dynasty status be questioned. And towering over both, Wilson's explosion, her eruption in anger, her claim that the scales were tilted. Those words now live inside every dribble of the series. But here's the truth, the Fever didn't ask for Wilson's accusations. They didn't need her words to validate their belief. Indiana has lived on the margins all year, written off as broken, injured, unfit. Their whole journey has been a story of stitching victory from scraps, breathing identity into gaps where superstars were thought missing. No Caitlin Clark on the floor, no chorus of analysts backing them, no bright lights centered on their names. What they've built is out of bruises and underestimation. So when Wilson cried foul, Indiana didn't need to answer with their mouths. They answered with their silence. The silence of fighters who don't imagine pity, the silence of workers who know what they built can't be erased by shouts from across the aisle. That silence contrasts perfectly against Las Vegas's noise. A dynasty doesn't like cracks in its ceiling. It doesn't like the world circling like sharks at the first drop of blood. But that is life at the top. Every stumble is magnified, every defeat dissected under a microscope that weighs pounds heavier than what any underdog faces. That microscope burned hot on Wilson's eruption. Clips shared, fragments remixed, tone analyzed with forensic obsession. What she meant as righteous anger was reshaped into controversy, into vulnerability. Indiana doesn't have to manufacture bulletin board material when the queen has already stapled it herself. And yet, Vegas is dangerous precisely because of this. Anger plus humiliation is flammable, but for champions it is also catalytic. This team has been hardened in the forge of back-to-back banners. They have seen schemes designed to frustrate them before. One outburst, though loud, does not define their season. And when prided teams burn, they often burn hotter the next night. That's the specter Indiana faces in Game 2. Not only the physical force of Wilson and her army of co-stars, but the weight of a dynasty forced to fight not just Indiana, but perception itself. That's also why the referees have unintentionally become co-stars of this drama. No one wants it, least of all them, but they'll walk into Game 2 with magnifying glasses trained on every whistle. Vegas fans will groan at every call against their team. Indiana fans will instantly suspect an overcorrection every time the Aces benefit. That's the new environment Wilson's words created. The referees shift from background figures to spotlighted characters. And Indiana will have to play above that static. Because if they don't, if whistles decide the rhythm, if calls swing momentum, the conspiracy conversation only grows louder. The real antidote for Indiana is to win beyond doubt. To play with such clarity, such violence on defense, such crispness on offense that whistles can't explain the scoreboard. Win clear, and they seize the narrative. Lose close, and the whispers Wilson birth metastasize. You can feel the heart of the story setting. Indiana's secret weapon remains its freedom, no weight of expectation, no shackles of assumed greatness. The Fever run hard because no one says they shouldn't. The Aces labor heavy because everyone says they can't fail. Those dynamics will make the difference. Loose versus tight. Pride versus hunger. Anger versus composure. That's Game 2. That's why the anticipation stings electric for both fanbases. From a historical lens, this is where legends write themselves. Dynasties either reinforce their walls after cracks appear, proving their structure is unshakable, or the cracks widen into collapse. Underdogs either double down, chaotic but hungry, rising into immortality, or come tumbling back to earth. The moments that last decades always sprout here, not in first rounds, not in easy routes, but in series where controversy and chaos crash headlong into talent and will. Indiana vs. Vegas, ignited by Mitchell's scoring and Wilson's eruption, has bloomed into exactly that type of series. A trial. A measuring stick. A torchlighter. The beauty lies in the duality of its possible endings. If Vegas storms Game 2 and Game 3, fans will dismiss Wilson's eruption as nothing but extra fuel for her fire, a small stumble before a dynasty's march continues. If Indiana finds a way to keep striking, to keep their composure, to turn accusations into accelerant, then Wilson's outburst will live on not as fuel, but as fracture. It will become legend not of strength but of what happens when giants tremble and bark. Either way, it is unforgettable. Either way, the story extends beyond the hardwood. Fans will debate this series for years not because of a score, but because of the night when fury and underdog grit collided. Indiana walks into Game 2 not with swagger, not carrying themselves as conquerors, but as survivors. Their history books already carry that win. Vegas storms forward with wrath in their eyes. On one side, calm proof. On the other, fiery reclamation. This is not just playoff basketball. This is drama in its purest form. This is sports entertainment without scripts, unfolding in live confusion and glory. And all of it turned from competitive to cultural the moment Wilson opened her mouth and detonated her claim. They cheated for the Fever. A single sentence reshaped an entire series. And now we wait. We wait for tip-off, for those first few possessions. We wait for Wilson to either stand taller or stumble again. We wait for Mitchell to prove history loves her too. We wait for the referees to blow their whistle and for fans to accuse or argue or cheer. We wait for resolution, knowing resolution only deepens the legend. One way or another, the echo of Wilson's explosion will never leave this series. The scoreboard will fade into record books, but her words will carry weight as long as Fever fans and Aces fans exist to debate them. Moments like this are why postseason basketball burns so much brighter. Risk, pride, legacy, perception, they all collide beneath the lights. And from here forward, both Indiana and Vegas will live with the story that Aaliyah Wilson's eruption created.